Travis Scholes, Commercial Director here at LMS, and I'm here with Mike Ward, Founder and Executive Chairman at Armalytix. Mike, how are you today?
Great. Nice to see you, Trav.
So welcome and thank you for spending time with us this morning. So why are we here? As part of the initiative that we've brought together in NPTN, the likes of Armalytix and Movely, Lloyd's Banking Group, Connells, TM, Credas, and a bunch of other companies together to create a end-to-end process where it's completely digital for the customer. We're collecting information in one place and we're moving that data through the process to other actors in the journey to ensure we create a singular digital end-to-end home buying experience for the customer. And this is a extension of our original pilot we did in 2024, 2025. And one of the things we've extended obviously is bring the lender into the journey, but also how we bring the broker, source of funds and proof of funds into the journey as well. And just by chance, I'm talking to Armalytix, our provider of that in the space today and in the proof of concept. So Mike, if you don't mind, just give me an overview of Armalytix, what you guys do, and really importantly, your role in the initiative that we've taken so far.
Yes, so as you say, I'm Executive Chairman, a rather ground title, of Armalytix. Armalytix is a financial data intelligence firm. It sounds a bit of a mouthful, but broadly, what does that mean? That means our focus and expertise is around collecting the appropriate financial information from home movers. It's most often deployed in a source of funds check. So within the UK, we do about 1 in 6 source of funds checks in a home moves. I guess what are the core foundations of Armalytix, which allowed us to be sort of part of this fantastic pilot? I guess firstly, we are FCA regulated as something called an AISP, which is an account information service provider. So we are regulated to do this service. The second thing is we spent the time building our own proprietary connections to the bank. So a core part of this journey is open banking. And we have our own proprietary links to each of the banks. And then the third thing is we always set ourselves up as a data controller. So the aim being that a home mover can trust us to gather the information and then share it to the appropriate parties. And we have all the obligations which should be there as a data controller to make sure that we protect their data and only give it to the people who need to see it. So all of that it's been great to be part of this pilot with the NPTN, and it simply wouldn't be possible without a service such as NPTN to direct us to who to share the information with.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's been a really interesting time to put all these pilots together into a singular journey. I'm particularly interested in terms of how we brought the broker and the lender into the journey and using source of funds, proof of funds. It was the first thing they spoke about when we spoke to them. Why do you think that journey is so important to the lender and to the broker? Why did they choose that the first thing they want us to go and test as part of this journey, you think?
I think, it's interesting. And I think there's the reason now, and there may be the reason in the future why it's such a focus. So I think the reason now is often a conveyancer will say that one of the largest parts of their process outside of property information is around assessing source of funds. I think secondly, there is also within a lender's journey and a estate agent's journey some element of connecting financial data. And I think you alluded to it earlier, where there's a sort of proof of funds check, which is close to a source of funds check. A lender may need to do a source of funds in certain circumstances. And then the conveyancer typically would do it on pretty much every transaction. And all of them have pointed that to say, well, if we can't solve this bottleneck, then we may have solved all the other problems, but we've still got a bottleneck there. And so when NPTN approached us about the idea of putting a source of funds check earlier in the journey, we collect that distributor information, then NPTN will inform us when the other parties are appointed and we can share it. It seemed to us to be a really compelling proposition in the same way as it was to the lenders and to the agents.
So just to be clear, for anyone who might be uninitiated to what we're doing, we're not changing the quality of the check. All we're simply doing is when we know that one of the transactions is going through NPTN, the broker will understand that, and the point where the broker is instructed to go and find the right appropriate mortgage product, like a decision in principle, they're instructing the Armalytix check at that point, and that information is shared downstream to the other actors who need it once you guys get notification of who's been appointed.
That's correct. And I think they've got the knowledge that they're dealing with a firm who deals with verified information, who has appropriate regulatory permissions to do it, and has the robustness of technology to make sure that you've got the appropriate uptimes in the service. And God forbid, if anything was ever to go wrong in relation to that, we have the direct connections with the bank So if there's any downtime, we can fix it directly ourselves. We're not relying on a third party to do that for us.
Yep. Well, we're very grateful for you guys being involved, to be fair. But I think when we first started having a conversation, you guys jumped to the opportunity, I think. And the motivation was there. I think you saw some of the challenges that we're facing as an industry today, the same way that kind of we do, and maybe some of the other people involved in the pilot. Just talk me from your point of view and from an Armalytix point of view. What do you think are the biggest challenges facing home buying and selling today, and why an initiative like this is so interesting to you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think more, just if I speak generally, and I'm sure it's a similar theme you'd hear from everyone, is we've all grown up in a world of a sort of fragmented process where you've got bilateral processes, agent to home buyer, home mover, broker to home mover, lender to home mover, conveyancer to home mover. And clearly, any initiative which aims to join that up, which is so appealing to us, because you couldn't really fix it if everyone remained working in bilateral ways. Yeah. So from our standpoint, also the other thing was that LMS's excellent relationship with lenders. My view was nothing was going to change of any substance without the lenders taking an active role. So when Lloyd's Bank approached us both about cracking this issue, and then Connors as well, we were all ears, because from the very beginning, we always thought, my background had been banking, I guess. So I'm not going to pretend to be a total property expert. Over the last 7 years, I've hoped to have learned something.
Neither am I, to be fair. So I'll make sure I never say that.
But it did seem to me to be a little crackers to be doing all these processes completely separate from each other. The challenge we always had was without a firm like LMS acting as a sort of orchestration and secure place for this data to be shared from, it was very hard to know how to fix it. And so we were delighted when you got us put together with the various parties to go and help solve it, because we hadn't built the product initially, conceptually, to go and solve this, but there wasn't the core infrastructure to go do it. So that's why we're super excited.
It's interesting, actually. I think you hit the nail on the head for me. I do still consider myself as an outsider in this space as well, actually. You're kind of learning more and more every day. I'm certainly not a conveyancing expert by interest and imagination, but watching each actor in the process over the last 4 or 5 years, particularly since COVID, or as part of COVID, actually, when you think about it, that might actually be a bit of a watershed moment for us and many other industries, actually. But the force to go digital was really, really apparent. And each actor alone went along their journey of digitizing their product. And we saw things like speed to offer, decrease massively, automation within conveyancing, estate agencies bringing some other stuff like material information into their journey, digitizing their onboarding. Each actor went out of the way to try and improve their part of the process, to try and create a better customer experience. And I think I saw some stats from UK Finance a couple of years ago, but the hundreds of millions of pounds have been spent across the industry trying to improve it. And as a result, cancellation rates are plus 30% and kind of, I think they're steady off now, but we're rising. Time to complete is probably at its all-time highest. And you read the OPDA stats on the second kind of consumer survey, people are still quite fearful of moving. And in fact, quite a large percentage just never want to move again unless the process gets better. So despite all the effort, there has been a tremendous amount of effort, and you can't take anything away from anybody's part of that process. Things just haven't improved. And from your role and where we sit, we think that is that knitting, that connection, that orchestration that kind of brings it all together. For you, is that the main thing we can do differently right now? Is this the main thing that we can do, that getting all these parties working to an agreed data standard and an agreed way of working, and they're all sharing a single source of truth? Is that where our efforts should be at the moment, bringing all these actors together into one process?
Yeah, I think so. Fundamentally, without that, I don't see how we're going to make substantive change. Actually, I was thinking about this over the weekend, and I think I speak to a lot of conveyancers because predominantly source of funds is currently sort of the major obligation of the conveyancer. Not to say the other parties don't do something, but I guess a conveyancer has the vast amount of the work. And it's interesting, post the MHCLG sort of paper, I was at...
You beat me to it, Mike. You beat me to it.
Conference. It's interesting. There is going to be a game of whack-a-mole as well beneath the surface of processes which could be streamlined. Don't need any big, huge sort of data sharing initiative, but just frustrations, And quite often, lenders are often picked out as being frustrated with, and I get that. I was banking for 25 years. Yeah. I'm used to that. But there was some things where you're like, it is bananas that everyone has their own gifters form.
Yep.
They're all asking the same thing. Could you not agree one standard? That probably make conveyance's life a lot easier. But I think you're right. I guess going back to your point that it's about trusted data. It's about a data standard. It's about having a orchestration layer which operates across the parties, so that I can trust when NPTN say I need this for that person. In my role as data controller, I say, great, here you go. It's going to the appropriate person. And I think the advantages of that are just huge and will make the most difference. And then we've got a game of whack-a-mole on smaller things, which I think the industry just needs to get behind and say, okay, can we fix that? Yep. We just knock them off the list over time as an industry.
Yeah, I think you're right. The practical application of these technologies is quite interesting. I mean, obviously you mentioned the M8CLG consultation response, which obviously came out on Friday, just gone. And from our point of view, obviously delighted with a lot of the recommendations coming out of that consultation. They're the same pathway that we've been on for some time as an industry, as a group of people looking at these initiatives. The proof's going to be in the detail there, right, in terms of timings and standardization and what we do. But the momentum's never been higher behind this way of working. And actually, even being at Bold Legal last week, even seeing all these things come off, it feels like all these concepts people have been talking about for quite some time are now becoming reality. The key for me now moving forward is, how do you make it a reality? And I will ask for your opinion here. So the concept's okay. We're all kind of heading in virtually the same direction now and post the consultation. The technology arguably exists today to make this happen. So what's going to stop us being successful, you think, moving forward?
Well, I guess the challenge is, we sort of touched on when our meetings together in the lead up of the pilot is the number of actors involved. I think is the challenge initially, and that's why I was fully behind the LMS Lloyd's Connells pilot, because it was a controlled way of, right, can we get something through? Can we see if there's any particular issues? The technology, I agree with you, Trav, isn't the problem. The technology exists today. I think it's the point of understanding people's processes and how we can fit it to their processes.
Yeah.
We know that conveyancing have to spend a lot of time and money in creating sort of highly scalable processes. And I think part of the next phase will be, so how do we make sure that this process can fit into, for example, conveyance's process and be operated at scale? And it's a natural thing. You can't fix that up front without putting sort of water through the pipe. And I think initially, we used to do smaller, more controlled areas, fix those loopholes, then we can open it up to more parties, rather than try and do a big bang, boof, day one, let's see how it all goes, because it will inevitably fail. I always thought that some of the stuff I was involved with banking was complex, but actually when you move to a home moving transaction, the amount of processes which exist for all these parties, not necessarily standardized today, all requiring what looks like different data, but actually it's broadly the same. How do you trust that? There's all these different things, but actually we just got to look at these broad rails, push information through those, see if there's any issues we've come up in terms of bottlenecks in people's processes, streamline that, and then slowly broaden it out to more parties, in my opinion.
I disagree with you. I think you hit the nail on the head. I think conceptually it's such a big thing to try and solve, isn't it? You think about all those actors, the sheer volume and value of transactions going through, the risk that traditionally the conveyancers take a lot of as part of that process. Asking them to change or changing with them, or even taking their ideas that they give us and saying, go and implement those things. It's a difficult process when you think about the size and scale of it. My view is you kind of take the first step together, right? So whatever that first next step is, what do we all agree on that first step is? Let's try and take it together. But even we mentioned Bold Legal Group a couple of times. There was a really interesting panel discussion just before lunchtime. And one of the conversations around the cost of adopting new technologies and how that cost kind of traditionally falls to the conveyancer with the biggest amount of change to adopt a new process, a new standard, a new way of working. I think for me is how do we get around that cost of adoption? How do we make it really, really simple and easy for people to adopt, and make sure it's available for all? I think some of these technologies, I think there's a misconception that they're put aside for the big guys, or you've got to have huge development teams internally, or you've got to be really automated. I don't think any of these things work unless it works for the person in the front room doing the conveyancing, or the specialist lender in the corner, or the independent estate agency or broker. It has to be a process that works for all. And for me, That's the key part. And from where our heads are thinking, and from NPTN point of view, is how do we make it that simple? It's not another portal. It's not a huge cost of adoption. You don't have to break your processes up today. It's just an extension of what you're doing. And we start there, we're probably on half a chance of making it right.
I totally agree.
But that's easy said than done.
Easy said, but I would take your point. Everyone having totally different systems, all having different tech stacks, typically is a very expensive way.
Yeah.
One tech stack, a similar process is a far cheaper thing to implement. So I do get changes is difficult, and change can be expensive. Not success, but your final goal, I would hope, would be a far more economical system for all parties to property, and a better experience for the home mover as well. But this change element, I guess, it worries people. I get it. We haven't got all the answers today. How do you scope the budget for that level of change? Well, the point is, I think you've got to rely on a smaller party to sort of streamline the process. Okay, so this is the process I've got to implement. Yeah, that's correct. Okay.
And how do we do heavy lifting for them? It's one of the things I've been really happy about with the group of people we've got together in this particular proof of concept. Everyone's prepared to do the heavy lifting, and actually the lessons being learned are things that are repeatable and things we can fix for the people who are not involved and maybe involved later on. So we are just kind of here doing a process and trying to figure out whether it makes things quicker. We're figuring out how we can make things easier to adopt, how we can change our products and services to better suit the needs of the consumer. So those learnings are happening as we're going through these proof of concepts too, which I think is beneficial to what we're doing long term. Back to the Armalytix product stack. I'm really interested in learning a little bit more about it. Obviously, AML and fraud liability is one of the highest risk activities that happens in the home buying and selling process. How does receiving verified source of funds information earlier through the pilot and through this proof of concept change what's possible for them in terms of meeting those obligations? So how are we using your product stack to help reduce risk for the law firms, I suppose, would be the question I would ask.
Yeah, and I would have, I think there's two dimensions. One is, how does it help law firms today? And then it's, how does it help all property parties in the changing environment we've got around regulation? So from the first standpoint, I guess, by ordering the source of funds information earlier, the home buyer is better prepared. Okay, so we talk about, home sellers being prepared. Really, the source of funds ordering earlier is really, you're asking, home buyer, are you prepared for this transaction? Can you give us the correct documentation? What's the value, I guess, if we just talk straight from the conveyancer standpoint, in that sense, they've got the information available to hand immediately upon instruction. So NPTN make that available to them. We can also then run certain risk parameters around that, so that a law firm's risk parameters can be reflected in that report. So they can say, well, look, I do need to know if there's risk. And why is that important? Well, we know in conveyancing, not everyone's expert on every single client type. Yeah. And therefore, the law firm can more quickly assess whether this is a right client for them or not. And, what would be an example of that? I'm not saying that a client who funds a purchase through crypto cannot buy a house, but I guess the point is, if I'm a conveyancer who specializes in understanding crypto, then fine, that may be the appropriate client for you, but it's probably certainly not the appropriate client for every conveyancer on the street. So by being able to run these reports earlier, a conveyancer can assess whether, is this the right type of client for me, and then can get to work with assessing that source of funds, moving it through that check, and getting on with the actual proper legal work quicker and more effectively. And I guess the point of creating things like common data standards is, I can trust that data too. They've got the appropriate regulatory license, and they've got the right data information is prepared to the right standard for me. And I would say, though, that what I'm not saying is, and then the conveyancer doesn't have to ask any more questions. We know, presumably it's similar with property information. You're going to give them great property information, but there may be further inquiries they need to make.
Yep.
And that will be the same with the source of funds. Is there will be scenarios where the conveyancer will need to inquire further. It's not the sort of check where it's just pass or fail. Sometimes you'll need to check further, but we give them a good starting point where, in many cases, they say, that's all the information I need. It checks out. It's exactly what I want. I can now move on with the legal work. And if it's not, at least I've got the risk assessment to look at it and go, okay, I need to either further questions, or actually, this isn't the client for me. I don't have the required expertise. And then hopefully firms like LMS can direct them to someone who can work with that home buyer.
Yeah, it's interesting actually. I mean, NPTN's role, I think you touched on this, is not to make the decision for the law firm or whatever actor we're talking about here to decide what they should do next. It is about providing the information so they can make an informed decision themselves. The law firm will always be the expert in the actions that they need to take to secure, the right outcome for the customer and for the lender. So by any means, we're not trying to take that away. It's about access to that information at the most appropriate time, as early as possible in the process, to help them make an informed decision about what to do next. And I think that's a really important part to note. It's not about taking that away. It's not about making decisions upstream or away from them. It's just about making sure the process starts in a time where you can act as quickly as possible. And as a
Yep.
result, the whole process gets faster. Um, just on Analytics roadmap then, Mike, and particularly around the products and services we're using within the proof of concept. What's the end state look like for you guys? What's your product roadmap look like, and how do you see the evolution of the Analytics product set moving in the future to support this kind of collective way of working?
Yeah. I mean, we've thought a lot about it, and we've been speaking to a lot of all the parties. And what you realize is within a property transaction, once you de-silo it and say, source of funds, proof of funds is when you talk about financial data, there's an awful lot of financial data being passed around in one transaction. So but actually, when you look at what they're asking for, most of it sits in the dossier, which sits within the source of funds. So the vision I'd hopefully see, and this is not specific to Armalytix, but is okay, the home mover does a source of funds check earlier, but within that, we can provide parcels of information which might satisfy other levels of checks. So the obvious one might be an agent might want to see a proof of funds. It's not
Yeah.
quite source of funds, but very much it could differentiate one buyer from the other. Well, that's not a hard thing for us to do, be able to NPTN request to say, can I have a proof of funds for this agent? We go, yeah, we got it in the dossier, here you go. Or it could be a lender, they've got an income verification requirement. We can say, well, I've got the income over the past year. Do you want to see that element of it? Or it could be that risk triggers have gone off and one of these parties needs to see a full source of funds, and we can go and deliver that via NPTN to them. So I'd like to move to a world where there is a home mover provides a dossier of financial information. That dossier is provided to the source of funds standard at a legal level. The legal level is by far the most comprehensive of all source of fund standards. But within that request, we can send parcels of information back to satisfy other checks. And if you think about it holistically across it, that would really speed up home moving. And then clearly the other element is, we need to make the user fully informed, either pre or during transaction, that what information is going to who. So they can either have a choice to say, do you know what, I'm happy to share the full dossier or parts of it with these parties, or actually, can you tell me whoever's asked for the information, I'll approve it on request by request. It's still far quicker than what they would have today, which is go get 6 months of bank statements, give me some pay slips. They do it once and then have the full control of who gets what. And I see our role predominantly around getting the home buyer ready and then getting the home buyer access to share elements of that information to the appropriate parties during the transaction.
Not dissimilar to the ID passport concept, where that user consent, and I've got my digital ID, it's on my phone, I want to share it with this party, this party, and this party. You're talking about taking that one step further, going, there'll be individual overlays of data specific to each person that needs to consume it. I'm going to send this information to this person because that's what they need to see it. But it's one full check for the consumer that covers all the needs from all the different actors.
Yeah, exactly. And then with the permission layer that the user knows what's going to whom. And I think if we ever got to that state, I think from a home buyer's perspective, they would have a far less stressful, a less duplicative system around their financial data.
There's applications outside home buying, I suppose, for that as well, and that's not just a home buying use case, right?
Yeah, well, I see the future. I think if I look further out, this would be useful in so many other use cases. Even though I stuck within law, things like, family law, private client law, there's different elements. But I think if we brought back into home moving, it's all about financial data around lending. It's all about financial data around how to discern that Trav is a better buyer than Mike. It's all about financial data. Is Mike possibly a bad actor from a money laundering standpoint? But it all's taking the same data. It's just different depths.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. I think there's three pillars of information that we see, isn't there? You've got your financial information you're talking about, your identity information, and your property information. And those three things as kind of a golden lock of record. If we can get that information complete early on, the opportunities are really endless. We're talking about upfront decisioning on both the property and the person. And the way we can inform the buyer and a seller to put them with the appropriate product at the appropriate time, that stuff gets really, really exciting. And I think that's a nice end state for us all to aim at.
Yeah.
But you're right, there's so many steps that need to be taken to get to that point. Your data standards stuff, MHCLG consultation, you've got likes of CFIT and OPDA, home buying and selling, and all these kind of guys trying to kind of fill this void in terms of how we get a singular data standard and potentially some kind of regulation or mandation at some point in the future. But right now, I think they're looking to private enterprise going, can you go and see how this stuff works in the real world? And enough proof cases come out, I think they'll use the learnings from what's happening today to help inform their decision making later. And if we can do that, which is why these things are so important, I think, and the more people being involved in these things becomes important. We have to inform them from people who work in this industry every single day what good looks like. So we sort of said last week, and every time we have these conversations, a bit of a call to arms to all actors going, come get involved. There's an open door here. Come see what we're doing. So the more information we get, the better we can make the process, and the more informed we can make. The people will eventually make these decisions for us, right?
Totally agree.
One last question for me before you let you go, Mike. I've really enjoyed today, but you think we talked a lot about collaboration is one of the biggest keys in transforming the UK property market. If you could give one message out to people listening to this who are part of what we do today in terms of industry, what would you be asking them to do, and how would you ask them to get involved?
So I think, look, it's all about collaboration, and I think it's all about doing small processes and trying to fix them as we go through. This is, and I read a lot of the comments around post the MHCLG, and there's various different people, and I get it. Some people, people saying, hey, this tried this 10 years ago, this won't work, and I think the point is, I'm just trying to play my small part, which is around financial data. And, I want to dedicate all my energy to trying to make that as good a process as possible. But I guess it's all about people getting their voice heard. So if you're a conveyancer, I realize you're not going to have the scale of a Lloyd's Bank, etc. But if you work through your trade bodies, your regulated sort of get your voice heard in terms of what processes could be improved, and how they could be. I'm quite interested in the small log jams. Because we've got to do two things right. I think we've got to get the big framework right. And then there's probably small parts which are as frustrating for conveyancers. How do we get those heard, and how do we iron those out? And, I talk about gift as source of funds. I'm sure if I had a conveyancer who knows it well, they'd probably list another 14 frustrations, which actually the industry got together and went, okay, makes sense. Why don't we have one standard around this? We'd probably come a long way for getting some immediate quick wins, while we're still putting in place big statutory change, binding offers, whatever it might be, information standards around selling property information. We could probably go about fixing some smaller things. So I would just encourage everyone who's got a view, and there's plenty of people with lots of view. I'm just a financial data guy. I'm not going to get your voice heard. I think the industry is ready to listen, including the very biggest lenders. I do hear in these conversations, the lenders, these big bad guys who don't, it's not true. I've worked in one. They just might be blissfully unaware that, one bank does it one way and the other one does it another way. They don't sit there comparing processes. But if they hear, oh, hang on, that's bananas, let's see if we can fix that. I think you might find you're pushing an open door.
No, I agree. I was speaking to a friend and colleague who will remain nameless for this conversation, but we're talking about the inevitability of change in this space, and what that change looks like is still relatively uncertain. We know we're heading down a route where it might be digitization or standardization of information. There might be some mandation in the future. So we know we've got a general direction of travel. The specificity in that information is still to be determined. But if you recognise change is going to happen, you've got two choices really, which is let it happen to you or let it happen with you. But there's an opportunity right now for all those people to go, come and have you, to your point, come and have you say, make sure your voice is heard, make sure you kind of rally around a certain concept and you really believe passionate. And if we do that the right way, we will get the best outcome for us all. But even sitting here, and I remember being in the room with you and a few other actors trying to get this proof of concept off the ground. It's some good ideas, some really, really good thinking, but also know there's a hell of a lot of unknowns over here that still need to be found out. And the only way we're going to find them out is to go and do. And lucky enough, we've got enough actors from each process involved and has given us that feedback that we need to improve it. But without them, we wouldn't be making the right decisions. So I'm with you. It's very much a come and get your voice heard. Otherwise, change is going to happen anyway. But it should be representative of what you want. And I guess that's a really, really important part, isn't it?
I totally agree. But I don't think I've ever been more excited around a complex process and how we may be able to change it. And as I was speaking to my wife on the weekend, and I was like, there's this huge change going on. And she was like, is it really hard buying houses in other parts of the world? And I was like, well, it seems other parts of the world can be easier. And she goes, okay, so why can't Britain do something the same? And I said, I think we can. We just got to focus down on how to get it right. But there is nothing structural why Britain should have a more broken system than
it's
other
definitely a
parts.
conversation over a glass of wine, that one, isn't it, Mike, to be fair? Let me tell you why Britain is different right now. But you're absolutely right. The building blocks are now there, I think, in terms of the motivation for change is here. I think we've got some good guardrails now, got the right people looking at it. There's enough groundswell from each actor group to go, okay, we've got a real choice and chance right now to go and make something different and better. And actually, the only thing that's going to stop us now is our inability to collaborate on what good looks like. So if we get that bit right, technology isn't a problem. There's not a lack of resources to go and build the new thing. Government will listen. It is, can we help them make the right decisions at the right time? And we do that with enough people feeding in information, I think.
Great.
Mike, thank you very much for your time today. It's been a pleasure talking to you as always. And I'm sure we'll catch up soon.
Thanks, Travis.
Cheers.